Democratic Representative John Arthur is a public school teacher. He was Utah's Teacher of the Year in 2021 and a finalist for National Teacher of the Year. He's also a member of the Utah House from Salt Lake City. Now, the Utah Fits All Scholarship Program, which is the state's voucher program, just got hit with a scathing audit from the state auditor's office. And the findings are wild. Spending was for things like mirrorless cameras, gaming PCs, MacBook Pros, Pelotons, trampolines, and a mountain bike worth over $6,000. All of that was purchased with taxpayer money that critics say was supposed to go towards improving kids' education. The record keeping was such a disaster that auditors had to build their own AI model just to figure out where the money went. And even then, they could only trace about $1 in $5 with any confidence. Representative Arthur is a classroom teacher himself, so he's got a unique perspective on what it's like watching public school budgets get squeezed while voucher money goes to home electronics and season passes. We get into all of that, the audit, the legal fight over whether this program is even constitutional, and what he thinks needs to happen next. If you're new here, my name is Brian Schott with Utah Political Watch. We dig into Utah politics without the spin. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Representative Arthur, it's really exciting to have you on the show today. Thanks for taking the time.
No, as I said, it's an honor. You may not like hearing that, but it is. So thanks for having me.
Well, I always tell everyone, just wait until we get finished and then we'll assess where things go. I wanted to have you on to talk about this astonishing audit that came out of the state auditor's office of the Utah Fits All Scholarship Program. It's not a scholarship program. It's a school vouchers program. That's just a piece of marketing that they did when they passed this. But they found, and the audit says this, quote, wasteful and extravagant purchases. The thing was such a mess that they had to create their own AI model just to dig through the purchases that were being used in this program. We're going to get into some specifics, but give me your first impression when you see this audit come out and they find that $7 million was spent on high-end electronics and custom furniture and season passes and things like Pelotons. And it's really astonishing because this is money that's supposed to be going to public schools.
That's exactly right. And back when we were debating the Utah Fits All Scholarship Voucher Program initially, this is what we all anticipated would happen. We anticipated that the taxpayer dollars would go to pay for things that had nothing to do with really increasing learning outcomes for kids. You know, on a philosophical level, I firmly believe that public money needs to stay in public education, right? But beyond that, as somebody who cares about good stewardship of funds and making sure that people are held accountable for spending money in the right way and making sure that money is appropriated in a thoughtful way to ensure that that happens, we educators, everybody who pushed back against this bill initially, saw this coming. We knew that these funds would be used for all kinds of things that people would point to and say, no, a trip to Europe, that's social studies, that's academic. You know, a Peloton, that's PE. I've never walked into a PE class and saw a Peloton waiting for me, and that's, again, entirely predictable, unsurprising, but still so frustrating to see happen.
And you bring up a good point as a teacher, and you are a teacher, but when you hear that $600,000 or more went to purchases, over $1,000 on things like MacBook Pros, gaming PCs, mirrorless cameras, while data from the Utah Education Network shows 71% of the devices actually used in public classrooms are Chromebooks that go for like $300 a pop. What does that contrast tell you?
It hurts so bad, and the amount of money that each recipient of the Utah Fits All voucher gets is on average higher than the appropriation that we put in the weighted pupil unit for our public school students. So when I have to put in help desk requests because keys are missing from laptops and there's connectivity issues, and I can't get my kids to connect to the instructional software that I need them to be using so they can grow as readers and mathematicians. And then I hear about a kid getting a gaming laptop from this voucher program. It drives me nuts because our children in public schools deserve better than that. They are the students that our constitution says our legislature is beholden to, the ones that they need to produce a system that is effective to serve. And to see funds siphoned out from our public schools to buy extravagant devices that have no real academic benefit is I think a failure to live up to the promise that we've made to all of our kids and our educators in this state.
Now, I know what you're going to say, but I have to ask the question. Could a classroom teacher ever get discretionary funds approved for anything close to those items, or a Peloton, or there was a mountain bike that was almost $6,200 in there? Could a classroom teacher ever get those discretionary funds approved?
Absolutely not. There are avenues that we as teachers take in order to try to connect our students with the technologies, the devices, the tools that we think our kids need. But in order to do that, we got to hustle. I got to go on Donors Choose. I got to put up some sort of a project and ask people to donate to my campaigns. I got to ask my friends and family, strangers around the world, saying, for example, the last one I ran was so that my students could have headphones that had microphones attached, because I teach a lot of kids who are learning English as a second language. They get tested in February where they have to speak into these little mics. And in order to get the devices to prepare them for that assessment, I have to go out on my own and ask private donors to connect me with the resources that I need to be successful. If I went to my IT department and said, hey, you know what? I really need mirrorless cameras. They would maybe do me the courtesy of asking why. And when, when I tried to justify it, they would say, no, that is not an approved purchase. That's not something that we do in public schools because that's not in the budget. That's not what we have money for, because our schools, our local school districts, our communities are struggling to pay for the expenses that we have right now in education. So much of it caused by unfunded mandates from the legislature. And so when we ask for those discretionary pieces, those nice to haves, the answer is almost always no.
When they first passed this bill, they funded it
Mhm.
a certain level, and then they came back and doubled the funding even before it had ever started. They tightened
Yeah.
up some of the things last year after it was revealed that people were spending money on
Yeah.
ski passes and stuff like that. But there was a lot of pushback from the homeschool community, and 80% of the people who get these funds are homeschoolers in the state. But there was a lot of pushback because they were really worried about the accountability, because it seems like the way that this was written in the first place was to minimize the amount of accountability and scrutiny that this
Yeah.
money would go for. And I think that lawmakers admitted that,
Yeah.
because they made some changes that furniture, musical instruments, season passages, those are banned starting this year. Does that tell you that this original law was written too loosely, or that it was never really about accountability to start with?
I think that most everybody, even those who support the law, would acknowledge that it was originally written too loosely, and the fixes that have come in are improvements over what was before, but it's still feeding into a system that is taking public money and putting it into private education. You know, the fact that right now under the new changes to the statute, you can't, for example, purchase a musical instrument, but you can still rent one. Uh, does not change the fact that my students, when they go to music, they get whatever they are given by the musical department. The fact that you can still buy high-end electronics, and you can get a new laptop, I believe it's every 3 years. That is still not equal or equivalent to what my students get in our public schools, and they're using public money to do it. So no matter how many fixes that they put onto this law, no matter whether the Pelotons can be purchased now or not, the first problem is that they were ever allowed to be purchased in the original language of this bill, and the second issue is the underlying issue has not been addressed. The fact that we are taking revenue that has come from income taxes, which from 1896 were earmarked for public education, and using those revenues to purchase $8,000 worth of private school tuition, or now under the law for 5 to 11-year-olds, $4,000 worth of home education supplies, or $6,000 for older students. That's still a siphoning of our taxpayer dollars into private coffers.
And let's expand on that a little bit. I mean, this is state income tax revenue, and in the state constitution, it says that income tax revenue can only be used for public education, higher education, and some social services for disabled citizens. How do you talk to your colleagues who are also teachers about the fact that this money that could be going into their classrooms went to trampolines, gaming computers, instead of their classrooms? What is the reaction that you're hearing from teachers about this?
Yeah, for teachers, this is hard to talk about because we fought so hard to prevent this from happening. And it was wild, Brian. I don't know if you remember, but teachers came out and opposed a bill that also included an historic raise for teachers. So you've never seen people who are underpaid fight so hard not to get a raise, right? We got out there and we battled back against the bill because it ultimately would weaken this thing that we love, public education. And so we pushed back against it. The way that the supporters of this legislation interpret our constitutional language as changed under Amendment G is really interesting, because in the Constitution now, I believe it's Article 13, Section 5, it says, that money essentially is earmarked for public education, higher education, students with disabilities, and also to support children, right? And so the supporters will say, oh, it says to support children. This is supporting children. But the judge in the district court who heard this case struck that down because they said, look, when this was presented to the voters, it was presented as we need more money for social services for students with disabilities, for children with disabilities, or individuals with disabilities. And so the language was never intended to open this up to vouchers. This was never intended to open up the opportunity to take public money and put it in private education. So the way that it is worded is not the way that it should be interpreted. And so the law was ruled unconstitutional. It's now pending appeal at the Supreme Court. And, as an educator, it's frustrating not just paying attention to education law, but also paying attention to these bills that have changed the structure of our state Supreme Court. For example, this body that is now going to have to make the decision on whether or not the Utah Fits All scholarship voucher program is constitutional. They could very easily come out and say, no, you know what, we're going with the strict textual reading of this constitutional section, and it says support children. This supports children, disregarding the other part of the Constitution that says that the legislature is responsible for establishing this public education system. We'll just say that they can do that plus private education funded pieces, and it's good. As educators, we're smart enough to recognize that all of these pieces are connected, excuse me, and we're paying attention to all of them.
And you bring up a great point about the Supreme Court. They passed the bill to create 2 new justices on the state Supreme Court this last year, packing the court. Plus, there are 2 people who stepped down from the Supreme Court. So Governor Cox is going to have 4 nominees, 4 new people when this issue is finally heard before the court. They also created the new Constitutional Court, which is a 3-judge panel, and any challenge to state law goes there instead of through the regular district court process. So they're really trying to pack hack and rig the systems, making it harder to challenge what they do up on the Hill. And I think that's a very good point to bring up. I want to get back to the audit, though.
Hmm.
It One of the things that really jumped out to me was that the record keeping in this entire thing was a mess.
Hmm.
The auditor's office said that they could only identify about 19% of the transactions with confidence. The rest weren't traceable enough to categorize. They had to build their own AI model just to figure out where the heck all this money went. Um,
Yeah.
you know, what is your thought about that when every dollar spent by public schools is scrutinized so heavily
Mm.
and then you've got this program that the parents can pick and choose what category they want to categorize these expenses on, and the record keeping is so loose that even the state auditor could only figure out where about $1 in $5 went.
Yeah. And, you know, when we talk about public education funds, we're talking about funds that are accountable to our legislature, our state school board, our local school boards, the business administrator in each of those districts and LEAs. There are people that we can go to and say, what is going on with our money? And we can elect the people who vote in public meetings how they're going to spend that money. This program was designed to have a program manager, and the original program manager for the Utah Fits All voucher was ultimately replaced because they did not do an effective job. I'll just say it that way. And folks, when you talk about the voucher program, they will say, "Oh, these purchases, that's from like the first year, second year. You can't like hold it accountable for that. There's growing pains, and oh, you can't hold the record keeping. You can't hold the new company accountable because that was the old company, and now there's Odyssey. And I personally don't know a lot about this program manager that's in place now, but I do know that this is a lot of money to manage, and the definitions in statute on what you can or cannot spend it on, still to this day, like curriculum, how you define curricula is still something that even teachers will debate when we talk about what resources we want to bring into the classroom, let alone a program manager that does not have a really strong background in education and pedagogy and all the other things that you have to understand in order to determine if something is actually going to improve somebody's education. Also, considering the fact that there is no assessment piece at the end of each academic year for the kids who are receiving these scholarships. So, if you're not going to have a tool in place to determine whether or not kids are learning, then how can you determine whether or not the purchases they're making are improving their education? Because there's no measure at the end to know if they grew or not. And so when people every year they reapply for the scholarship, priority is given to previous scholarship holders and their siblings. They're just going to reapply each year for another round of $4,000 or $6,000 for the homeschool folks, and who knows if the purchases, one, are actually justifiable, or two, if those purchases are having any sort of positive impact on these kids' education.
Do you think that this audit is the kind of thing that might move your Republican colleagues up on the Hill? You're a Democrat, you're in the minority. Um, do you think this might be the kind of thing that might move those who currently support the Utah Fits All program, or do you expect them to just sort of brush this off? You kind of alluded to it in your last answer, but you've been through a session up on the Hill, and you're running for reelection this year. But
Yeah.
I'm curious if you think that they're just going to brush this away and focus on whatever culture war issue has grabbed their attention.
Yeah, I don't think that this audit is going to change anybody's mind, because I think that they believe that they have already addressed the issues outlined in the audit. I don't think that they're going to disagree with anything because the audit presents information in a very straightforward way. I think that the underlying issue that I keep coming back to that public money should stay in public education is not the priority for my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. I think that their priority, as they see it, is school choice is everything, right? School choice means that we need to provide access to all the different educational opportunities that kids may want, and this is another tool for helping families customize their kids' educational experience. Now, the problem with that is, and you hear folks say this often, this type of voucher program is not school choice. This is still schools making the choice on which students they are going to take in. This is giving students money to the vast majority of the money within the program, even though more of the students are like homeschoolers, they're only using it for smaller pieces. The majority of the money is going to private school tuition, right? Schools that are not obligated to take students with disabilities or students who come from households where English is not the first language spoken. This is giving money to schools that are legally allowed to discriminate about which students they serve. That's not school choice. That's taking our public money and giving it to private institutions that can discriminate and keep kids, any kid that they want out. And that is, I think, failing our mission to provide an excellent neighborhood school for every Utah child. That's where our money should be going. I don't know if this I know that this audit is not going to move the needle in the minds of my colleagues, but I do hope that it raises enough public attention and awareness, and also frustration and anger, that they are more compelled to consider alternatives, or ultimately lowering the funding. Taking away the funding, in my opinion, would be the best move in the long run, and shutting down the system because of public pressure, because of the frustrations coming from the public. And as we've seen with data centers and other issues, the public's in a place where they want to push back. And this is a place where I'm hoping the public will channel that energy and put the appropriate pressure on their elected officials. I don't think the audit's going to do it, but I think the audit might frustrate enough people that they can either vote out some folks or vote in the types of legislators and leaders who are committed to protecting and elevating public education.
Last thing I want to ask you, you've been through one session up on the Hill. You were on the State
Mhm.
Board of Education prior to that. Um, do you think that the small number of educators who are in the legislature is obviously that, to me, that feels like it's a perspective that's being waved off, because you have real estate developers,
Uh-huh.
you have lawyers, and there's just a handful of teachers. But the number one issue that is the issue that brings the most proposed legislation every single year has to do with public education. Can you talk about
Yeah.
your experience, being an educator and, trying to bring your perspective of things to your colleagues who may or may not have that experience?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I've been advocating for public education for several years now, and I want to give grace to my colleagues, because a lot of them hold a deep love for education, for students, for teachers. But at the same time, unless you're living it, you can't say that you really know. You cannot say that you get what's happening in classrooms and how desperately we need additional resources unless you've been desperate in the classroom, looking around and saying, I cannot serve at the level that I should with what I've been given. And it's really hard for teachers to serve in our legislature. I'll just tell you right now that I had to take 7 weeks of unpaid leave and get a long-term sub. It's a challenge to get more teachers up to the legislature. I would hope that more of my colleagues would take time to not just hear, but really listen, and through those conversations with teachers in their districts or just from around the state, open the possibility that there is a better way and that they should consider changing their minds and their votes on certain issues. When they hear over and over and over again from the education community, from educators, that this has to change, that this needs to go, that more of them would say, yeah, I think that they may be right, or at least we should be making changes to the statute that ultimately pare it back. The legislature has demonstrated on other issues that they're willing to pull back on things and sunset things. This is something that should receive the highest level of scrutiny, and ultimately it should be replaced with, or actually, let me change my answer to that. This this program needs to ultimately go away. It needs to be removed from our statute, and the money that is going to this $120 million needs to be dedicated to other things that we as teachers are telling you will actually have an impact on our schools. I ran a bill last year that would put a certified teacher librarian in every district around the state, just one at the district level. And I was told, oh my gosh, this is just too hard of a fiscal year. We just don't have enough room in the budget. The fiscal note for my bill was somewhere around $2 million. You don't have $2 million to put a certified teacher librarian in charge of the collections in our state. You got enough time and energy to go after the books in our libraries, to go after the librarians who are putting these collections together, but you don't have enough money to invest $2 million into these people. But you got $120 million that you can literally take out of our public education system and put into private pockets. That's not good governance. That's not good policy making. And I'm hoping more teachers will ultimately join me at the legislature to carry the call within the building.
Representative John Arthur, where can people find you online? I love your social media content. I see
Thank
you
you.
on Instagram and on TikTok. Tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, definitely. On Instagram, TikTok, Ninth Evermore, the number nine, Evermore. And on Facebook, you just look for John Arthur, LinkedIn. I'm there as well. And I'll tell you, I all my content I post is appropriate for fifth and sixth grade audiences. If it wasn't, I would hear about it immediately. So please, if you haven't seen it already, check it out.
Representative John Arthur, thank you for your time.